Hello, and welcome to the NPCL Fathers and Families Corner, a free monthly series where we hear expert insight on critical topics revolving around responsible fatherhood. My name is Kiana Waters, and I'm here with Dr. Jeffery Johnson, President and CEO of the National Partnership for Community Leadership. And today we will be discussing marketing fathers and fatherhood programs. Hello, Dr. Johnson.
Good morning.
So I'd like to have you start by telling us what is the importance of marketing fathers and fatherhood programs.
Well, the important thing is that fatherhood and fathers is still a hard sell. There's a concern out there relative to one, whether or not fathers are living up to their responsibilities. There's a big research focus on the absence of fathers, and then there's some folks out there who say that fathers are no longer needed other than the fact of bringing a child into the world. And so it's just so important to overcome those many perceptions and those barriers that stand in the way of looking at fathers as assets as opposed to liabilities.
Okay. And so when we are marketing fathers and fatherhood programs, who is the target audience and why?
Well, there's several target audiences, and I like to look at them in the context of stakeholders. And for the sake of the viewing audience, I really do want to be very specific about who these stakeholders are. And there are three. There are individuals and organizations that control resources needed by programs that serve fathers and also that can support fathers in their effort to be successful. There are also individuals and organizations that affect the public perception of fathers in terms of the media. Many of the fathers, particularly the low-income fathers that we work with at NPCL, come from areas where there's a lot of crime, there's a lot of points of view with regards to the value or the devaluing of men, and it is so important to be able to portray to the media the positive aspects of who these men are and also who they are as fathers. So that's an important group. And then the final group is the individuals and organizations served by the work. And so we have to convince mothers in many instances about the value of fathers. We have to influence grandmothers, grandfathers, and also children. But more importantly, we have to convince fathers that they are of value, that they are an asset, and they can be contributing members to their family, to the workplace, and to the community at large.
All right. So how exactly should fathers, particularly low-income and non-custodial fathers, and the fatherhood programs be promoted, and why should they take this approach?
Well, it's so important to know that many of these fathers have a lot of baggage they have to overcome. And that baggage may be the fact that they've had some contact with the criminal justice system, that they are likely not to have all the education that they want. We live in a digital society, an information-oriented society, and they're still trying to kind of get their educational act together in some regards. And then with the different protests that are going on right now, you got a lot of different views about who those young people are who are protesting. Some of them are dads, some of them are moms. And so it's just so important that the programs understand that as the community realizes what it does inside the walls of a fatherhood program, that what you're doing is building assets, and you're building upon assets that these fathers have that they want to bring to their family, that they want to bring to the workplace, that they want to be productive citizens, and that is so important that that image is created in order to enable the fathers to be successful in any walk of life that they choose.
All right. You touched on this a little bit, I think, that we are promoting the fathers in their best image. And we know that one of the key components of, or key goals of fatherhood programs is to equip them to be the best fathers they can be in the lives of their children. So do you think there's any emphasis on children when promoting fathers and fatherhood programs?
I think the number one emphasis should be on children. And when you're promoting to stakeholders, when you work with funders, you want funders to know that the reason why you work with dads is to ensure bright futures for our children. When you're publicizing fatherhood programs to the media and the community at large, you want them to know that the reason why you're working with fathers is to ensure the bright futures for our children. And when you're working with mothers and grandmothers and granddads and other family members, you want them to know by that the fact that that father's in your program you're trying to build his assets so that he can be a positive influence in the life of your children, grandchildren, nieces and nephews. And so it's just so critically important that we understand that emphasis on children first. That's what, because that's what it's, at the end of the day, it's about. Why are you doing the fatherhood program? Well, you're doing it to help him, but you're doing it to help him so that he can be the best father he can to children to ensure their bright futures.
And putting children first is something we can all get behind, right?
We all get behind. I don't care who the stakeholder group is, funders like that, media people like that, and certainly family members love that.
Okay, so moving on a little bit, what is the overall goal of marketing fathers and fatherhood programs?
The goal is image building. In some regards, it's the lifting up of the assets. I keep saying assets because assets denote something very positive, and we want whoever is interested in this father, that may be a funder who wants to support the program that he's in. So he goes through those different classes and learns new parenting knowledge, has a transformed attitude, how he's approaching parenthood. It's just so important that part of it's understood. The other part of it is just to understand that the father is a person who is willing to do whatever it takes to be the best parent possible. And I keep coming back to that because that's what it's all about. So it's a branding, it's a image raising, it's the lifting up of a community asset that maybe the community is not looking at in the way that it should. I talked earlier about how you got a lot of father absence, and you got a lot of folks who believe that a lot of fathers become fathers didn't really want to become fathers, and as a consequence they don't want to live up to responsibility. And I can tell you through my 30 years of experience in working with men on father issues, most fathers want to be the best father they can be. But there are barriers sometimes that confront some of these fathers for being able to be a positive and meaningful role model in the life of their children's lives. And so what we want to do, we want to brand, we want to raise the image and profile of dads so that all the key stakeholders see him as an asset and not a liability.
All right. And so we know that one of the challenges that we're all dealing with right now is the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. So are there any adjustments that need to be made in the marketing of fathers and fatherhood programs right now?
Well, we have to pay attention to the various precautions. We have to create, we have to wear our masks, we have to have social distance, we have to wash our hands. At a basic level, those are some adjustments that have to be made. We have to make sure we have programs that those kind of protocols are followed in terms of how many people you can gather at one time and those type of things. But the other relates to the outreach to fathers and the actual conducting of the class sessions that you're going to have with fathers. And we got to use that. We got to take advantage of social media. Fathers are actively engaged in social media platforms such as Facebook, Snapchat, and I'm sure there are others out there that they are actively engaged in on their phones, on their computers, and we have to access and recruit fathers through that mechanism, as well as the traditional mechanism of asking for referrals from places where fathers have applied for jobs, or it may be from the child support office, whatever the case may be. We got to kind of include those in our outreach as well, but put a bigger emphasis on social media outreach because of the COVID adjustment. And then the other part, we have to make sure that when we conduct classes, that we have to make sure that fathers, one, those classes are being held and that they're going to be on a virtual platform, which essentially means online. And that we should not think that fathers are not familiar with it. Many of these fathers grew up playing Nintendo and other games like that. And so they are very sophisticated, even more sophisticated than some older adults, particularly younger fathers than we give them credit for. And then when we have the classes, we got to make sure they're very interactive. We got to make sure they're not too long. We got to make sure that they see really participating in these classes as something that's building their assets. And we're competing. We're competing against forces out there in the street and folks that would like to see those fathers doing other things, sometimes negative things, more so than the positive things. And so we have to understand that we have to make these adjustments. We have to make it work. We got to plan it out. And that another way we got to do this, we got to ask fathers themselves, during a COVID season, during this season of the pandemic, what are some of the best ways in which we can sustain their interest in the program, and the fathers know themselves what it will take in order for them to stay with these programs to build their assets attitudinally and behaviorally. That's in the long run going to position them to be a meaningful part of their children's lives.
All right. So you mentioned several good things in terms of marketing programs to the fathers that would be participating in them. Are there any adjustments in terms of the pandemic and the position that several programs might be in right now, where we need to maybe pivot or rethink the way that we communicate with those other important stakeholders that you mentioned?
Well, we just have to let the stakeholders know that we can operate successfully in a virtual environment. You know, we have children from preschool to college adapting to the virtual environment. We have a lot of workers, you know, from the federal government to private business like Google. Google has said to their employees, you never have to come back into the office. That's a COVID adjustment, you know, because I think that even when I was in graduate school, I only thought about, you know, managing people in the context of an office building and having people close to one another, you know, physically, and so they could see each other being productive and learn from one another and that type of thing. In a COVID environment, we can't do that. And so we have to make those adjustments. And again, I don't think there's any substitute for being in person, but what we have to let our key stakeholders know is that we can be successful in a virtual environment. We got to let funders know that. We got to let the public at large, to the media, know that we can be successful doing that. It's going to take some testing out, you know, and piloting efforts to work out the kinks. But I am absolutely certain that we can be successful in a virtual environment, and we have to make sure our key stakeholders know that, including family members.
All right. So as programs are making this adjustment, they need to definitely be open and sharing their success stories about how they're making the transition to maybe more virtual learning environments work.
And that's true. And again, let me also emphasize how important it is to make sure that the father can participate in the virtual environment. We have to make sure that he has access to a computer, or he knows how to use his phone to connect with classes, just like we do with students. And again, in grade school and in college, we have to also make sure that he has Wi-Fi access. You know, one of the things that I'm advocating for in some of my other volunteer work in the community is universal access to Wi-Fi. Because if we're going to make these adjustments, and some of these adjustments are going to be permanent, we got to make sure that all of us, but particularly parents, and in particular the dads, and specifically dads, for the sake of this session, have access through having the right equipment, through whether that's a phone or computer or Wi-Fi, because you have to be able to access it in order to benefit from it.
All right. So programs, something you should definitely take away from this is that we know you're going through a transition, as we all are, but you definitely want to let your stakeholders, your funders, your fathers in the community, and just your community at large know that you are making that adjustment and equipping them to be successful, as your program might look a little bit different than it has previously.
Yeah, but looking different, it should not be seen as a negative. It should be looked at as a positive, because I think that even when we finally find a vaccine to COVID, I do think that we're going to probably move to a new normal, which is probably going to be what I'm going to call a combination of in-person and also virtual learning. And what it essentially does for the professionals, and a lot of people viewing this video are professionals in the field of fatherhood, it broadens your repertoire. It just lets you know, it helps you build skills that maybe you didn't think that you needed at one point in your career, but as you advance your career, it's going to be very important to how to work with your clients, these fathers, in both an in-person setting and also in a virtual setting.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Johnson, for sharing your insight about the importance of marketing fathers and fatherhood programs with us today. To our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in, and be sure to join us next month for another conversation about responsible fatherhood.